friends. Happy Friday. It's good to see you. I have been excited to talk to you guys since the beginning of the week, and it's finally time. So welcome. My name is Megan. If we haven't met yet, I'm a life coach, and I help women who are stressed out and who are anxious and who want to do really amazing things, but then they get stuck because of things like perfectionism and the way they talk to themselves, and definitely how they feel inside their bodies, what's going on inside their heads because their brain is clogged with anxious thoughts. And I help them get calm and think clearly and get what they want. It's a really great job. So it's great to talk with you today. I'm going to talk about perfectionism, about how it makes you anxious, and then how being anxious makes you try to be more perfect. And I'm coming at this from someone who's not a perfectionist, except maybe I am. So the more I coach people, the more I learn about myself, and the more I learn about myself, the more I can help you guys. And what I do is I get really excited to learn all the other places where I'm like, oh, wait a second, I thought this wasn't a problem, but then I find out it was. So I am really passionate about helping women achieve their full potential because I truly believe that we all are on a big mission and we've got to be able to handle things. And when you are constantly stressed and anxious and your brain's not working clearly, you just can't. So I have seen firsthand how perfectionism and anxiety can hold my clients back, how it holds me back. And I just want to share some really valuable insights and strategies to help you guys understand why these challenges come up and how you can kind of let go of those perfectionist tendencies and have what you want. So let's talk about anxiety and perfectionism, first of all, and how those go hand in hand, how one feeds the other, and then one feeds the other, and how they cycle. So if you know anything about perfectionism, it's really just this pursuit of achieving incredibly high goals. And I don't mean having standards for yourself. I don't mean like expecting yourself to be honest or to like really go after what you want. I want you to have those goals. I'm a life coach. That's what I do. I help people get what they want. I help people get calm so they can get what they want. Other coaches might help people get clear on what they want, or to, there's life coaches for lots of different genres. I just happen to focus on anxiety because it's been a part of my life for so long. But when we talk about perfectionism, it is the relentless, I cannot stop pursuit of incredibly high standards, but with fear mixed in. We fear making mistakes. We fear what other people will say. We fear never getting what we want. And it's really this double-edged sword because having that drive and wanting to excel is great. It is. I want you to achieve high goals. I want you to have what you want, but it can also lead to anxiety and burnout and a constant feeling of not being good enough. And that's not okay. So we just need to find the right balance in there between going after what you want and also let's find ways to get it without turning into like a puddle on the floor. So for instance, I want you to just take a minute with me. I always like to imagine scenarios, and a lot of these are either from my own life or from people I've worked with, but I want you just to picture a scenario where you have a really big thing coming up in your life. If you work outside the home, it might be maybe a project you're working on at work. And maybe if you are working at home, especially as a mom, moms are jobs. Let's not pretend for 1 second that being a mom isn't a job. It is. Okay. Maybe you're just trying to get things around in your house, trying to declutter, or maybe you're trying to apply for a job and figure out how to balance childcare and your life, whatever it is. I just want you to go to this place where you have this really big thing coming up. And I want you just to imagine that you're spending countless hours, ridiculous amounts of hours, perfecting every single detail. Every detail. You've rehearsed, you've practiced, you've gone over and over and over again, and you're still overwhelmed because you still feel anxious because you're afraid that you might mess up. I might make a mistake. And what if I trip over my words? I promise you guys, I will trip over my words probably 20 times during this Instagram Live. But when you're anxious about that, it just makes you trip over your words more, and it makes you try and be more perfect instead of just saying, oh, wait a second, I'm a human. Let's hit pause, because rationally, most people don't think they're perfectionists because they know that perfection isn't real. But those two things don't have to go together. Okay. So whether it's at home or in your personal life, you can see this happening in always needing to have everything in your house be perfect in case someone stops over. It can come out in a lot of different ways. But if you're wondering whether or not this is going to apply to you, I'm going to assure you right now that if you wonder if you're a perfectionist, you probably are. This is why I said I'm not a perfectionist, but maybe I am. Okay, maybe I am. And I'm going to give you lots of instances in here about how I've discovered these things in my own life and how my clients find them in their own lives and how you can find them in yours. Okay, so doing things perfectly and having the perfect house and the perfect job all sounds great. But for perfectionists, they're not just like high achievers. It's like they base their self-worth on achieving these goals or being perfect. Okay, I talked a little bit about my hair on Monday and about how I'm like, there's no way I'm a perfectionist because I walk around like this most of the time. I don't dry my hair. I don't really do much of anything with it. And people are like, oh, your hair's so perfect. And I'm like, I have roots. Like it's crazy. It's in the eye of the beholder, right? So your perfect and my perfect aren't the same. But when it comes to something like all or nothing thinking, if you always think it has to be all this way or all this way, okay? That is a perfectionist trait. So perfectionists, a lot like high achievers or people who are really going after what they want, they set really, really, really big goals, like huge goals, which is awesome. I like that. I also have really, really big goals. But a high achiever can really feel good about the fact that they're doing a great job along the way. They'll say, hey, this is my goal. I'm already here. And they're going to say, that's really great. Like, I'm making progress. Whereas a person who's more of a perfectionist would say, I'm failing because I'm still all the way down here. This is my goal and I'm not there yet. So I've totally failed. Like, a perfectionist isn't going to accept anything less than perfect. Anything almost perfect. Like, so for example, if you're in school, if you're watching this and you're like, I totally bombed that test. And I'm, oh, you bombed it. What does that mean? I got like a B+. No, that's not bombing a test. You just thought you were going to get an A+ or an A, and that B+ knocked you down. So it wasn't perfect enough for you. Okay. I see this in people. I see it with kids I've worked with. I see it in my own kids. I see it in myself, and I definitely see it in my husband. I'm going to pick on him a little bit. He'll own this a lot because he's like, no, I like things to be perfect. So we're just going to pick on him, and he's out of town, so he can't defend himself right now. So number one is, are you an all or nothing thinker? The second thing is being highly critical. So somebody who's a perfectionist is more critical of themselves than other people would ever be of them. And they're also highly critical of other people around them. So they take a lot of pride in their accomplishments. They're like, no, I nailed it. I did a great job. And they tend to support other people. But this is like just people who are high achievers. But perfectionists focus on the mistakes. This is what they didn't do well enough, or they could have done that better. You know what? This person, they were late yesterday. They should never be late. Or this person, they had a typo in their post yesterday about perfectionism that they didn't catch until after they posted it. That was me, by the way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and look at yesterday's post where I talked about perfectionism. And a couple of hours later, I was back on Instagram and I was looking and I'm like, oh, it wasn't just a typo. It was like my brain was doing too many things at once and the words are out of order. Okay. That is not, being highly critical is not necessarily one of my perfectionist traits, but I have other ones, like being pushed by fear. If you are pushed by fear, if you're just a high achiever, you could be pulled toward like what you want. Like you can say, this is really, really what I want. And then they go after what they want, but they're also happy along the way. Remember I said they have big goals, but they're happy along the way. That's not true for perfectionists. Perfectionists feel afraid of failing and they're afraid of taking the steps forward because they may not be perfect enough to get them where they want. That's a big difference. The second thing is having unrealistic standards. As a coach, I help people achieve goals. I do that by helping them calm their body and stop thinking anxious thoughts and to get to the real thoughts, and then to create the steps along the way. And we really focus on those steps along the way. But if you are a perfectionist, you might see this pie in the sky idea out there and say, if I don't reach that, I'm not worth it. Like I'm not worth anything. So being a perfectionist tends to lead you towards having really big goals, but it's just one standard because they feel that their actions are never going to be good enough. Like I'm never going to be good enough to get that, which means since I'm not there yet, or because I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get that, and because I don't think I haven't reached that goal yet, I don't matter, or I'm terrible, or I'm a failure, or anything else. They have really negative self-talk. Okay. They focus really on just what the results are instead of those steps. Another thing that perfectionists tend to do is to get really down on themselves and almost depressed when they haven't reached those goals. So if you are somebody who's a high performer, or you have the steps down and you achieve on repeat, like I make it, that tends to be that you bounce back. I was like, oh, that was really disappointing and that sucked. What can I fix? Or, oh my gosh, that was so embarrassing. Next time, I'm not going to do that. But they have a next time. Whereas a perfectionist would say, I can't believe I did that. I'm so embarrassed. I'm never going to do that again. That was horrible. What do people think of me? And this causes a lot of anxiety buildup because they start to feel depressed about their self-worth, and they're not happy. And they also tend to slide into this really negative self-talk that makes them be anxious about other areas of their life. When you feel failure, when you are afraid of failing because it means something about you, you will become anxious in other parts of your life. You'll start noticing all the other places that maybe you don't feel like you are pretty enough or successful enough, or maybe you worry about all of the little twinges and feelings inside of your body like I used to do all the time. All of those things about being afraid of failing or of not being enough will sneak up on you, and the more you try to fix those things by being more perfect, the more anxious you'll become. And you'll say, okay, well, it wasn't good enough the first time, so I have to make it perfect this time. And when you fail, you'll say, I'm terrible, I can't do it, and you'll become more anxious, and then it just breeds in a big cycle. When this happens, it's really common for people who are perfectionists just not to do anything. So they back off, one, because they're afraid they'll fail, and when they're afraid they'll fail, they just procrastinate, and they put things off for a really long time. This is kind of a weird paradox, okay? It doesn't seem like perfectionists would procrastinate, because procrastinating would mean that you weren't punctual. In my mind, I'm going through my mind here. Like, I'm not punctual, or I'm not something like that, but it's kind of the opposite, because a lot of times we find out that perfectionists, if they can't feel uncomfortable or they can't feel like they might mess up, they just don't do it at all, or they put it off till the last minute, and then they end up sabotaging themselves. So they're like, oh, I'm really afraid I'm going to mess this up. I can't do it. It's not perfect yet. And then it gets to crunch time, and they're forced to do it, and they mess up, and then they're horrible to themselves. So they end up self-sabotaging by procrastinating. So, and again, this goes back to the fear of failure. And another thing that I have noticed so much in myself, probably for the last year, and I've worked on this with a few coaches, and I have to admit that just in the last month and a half or 2 months, I've noticed this has really disappeared for me, and I'm super proud of myself for this. I just want to say defensiveness. If you feel like you always have to be on guard because anything that is criticism or anybody else's mood or anything else really affects you, and you feel responsible, and like you failed because you didn't make everyone happy, or you didn't do it right the first time, whatever it was, you can become really defensive. And I noticed this in some of my relationships where I was always like, nope. And I would put up an immediate, like, it was almost like a force field. If I could describe it as anything, it was like a force field coming from my chest where I was like, you can't get in. And I would create this defense system because I didn't want to be criticized because it made me feel like I failed. Defensiveness is a perfectionist trait. Surprise, I'm a perfectionist. And I just would never have noticed myself, like labeled myself that way, because I post typos all the time, and I'm not really one to go out worrying about what I look like too terribly much, although I will never wear pajama pants to Walmart, ever. And I sometimes silently judge people who do, which is probably also some horrible thing. I'm not judging them as a human being. I just want them to put on pants. It's true. I can't apologize because it's true. All right. The other thing we know about people who are perfectionists is that they tend to have low self-esteem. High achievers tend to have like really high self-esteem. They're like, no, I can go after this. I can do this. If I mess up, it's fine. But that's not true for perfectionists. Perfectionists want big things, but they want to be perfect along the way. And if they're not perfect, then they tank and they feel terrible about themselves. So if you tend to be pretty critical of yourself and talk to yourself like really, really nasty ways, you are probably a perfectionist. So what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do? How do you stop being a perfectionist and then feeling anxious and then trying to be more perfect and then feeling more anxious and just going around and around in that cycle? I'm going to tell you how. The first thing we have to do is we have to find your patterns. And what I mean by that is we have to find where you're doing this, because as you've kind of learned in this Instagram Live, is that I wouldn't have called any of my traits perfectionism even a month ago. I would have been like, no, I'm not a perfectionist at all. It's really not a problem for me. Like, I'm not embarrassed when I mess up. I'm like, if I trip and fall, I'll be the first one to laugh at myself. Like, that's not me. But now that I'm like really peeking into my own life, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So we have to dig into our own heads. Unfortunately, we're not very good at looking into our own heads. So this is why you need me. Okay. What I do is when we get on a consultation call, we look over all the areas of your life. And I ask you questions that don't really have anything to do with anxiety because it's sneaky. So I'm going to say, okay, I want you just to tell me about your sleep. Like, how do you sleep? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being it's awful and I hate everything about it, or 10 is like it's perfect. Where do you go on this scale? I'll ask you about, hey, how do you feel about like dinner time? How do you feel about the foods that you eat? How do you feel about your job? How do you feel about your relationship with your kids or your spouse or your friends or your coworkers? How's your spiritual life? How do you feel about money? How do you feel about all of those different things? And we rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. And you might say, hey, it's a 7. And I'm like, that's not bad. For a perfectionist, they'll be like, it's terrible. I wanted it to be a 10. But if it's not, if it's a 7, okay, well, what would it take to make it a 10? Like, what do you actually want to see? And when you start thinking about what it would take to make it a 10, then we can start to see the places where you feel like maybe, oh, that's what I actually want. And your real thoughts start coming out. So we can find the patterns of where you start having that perfectionist thinking. And this comes really just through being aware about what you actually think and starting to make those changes. But we don't want to say, this is my goal. Yes, part of coaching is definitely setting goals. And I want you to achieve big things. But we're going to set realistic goals. And for realistic, I don't mean like, let's do this one thing. I mean, let's make your goal here, but let's also have like mini goals, like micro goals along the way. And what we can do with that is every time you take a step forward, we get to celebrate and give you a little dopamine party. And we get to say, okay, we're here now. Let's talk about all the things that worked. What got you here? But what didn't work? What did we learn not to do? And as you learn that, like, oh, I learned from that, you start to be more confident and you start to let go of the perfectionism that is attached to that. So we do that by setting realistic goals and then developing coping strategies, because when you are trying to be perfect and you start to learn how to let go of those, you're going to feel anxious and you have to be able to calm your body down so you can think clearly. Anxious people aren't thinking clearly when they are super duper anxious. They get brain fog. They can't complete a thought. A lot of times they're going to feel like they've got some ADD or some ADHD because their brain is just going too many tabs open. And those two things can go together. Don't get me wrong. You can have ADD or ADHD and anxiety. But when you're feeling exceptionally anxious, it can make it hard to concentrate on one thing. So we start talking about how do we calm down your body? How do we know that this is just anxious thinking? And then how do we say, okay, that's an anxious thought. What's the truth? Let's find the truth. Let's lower your stress. Let's practice some mindfulness. Let's manage your time better. Let's talk about what you need to do to take care of yourself. Maybe you need a break. Maybe you need to go outside and roll around in the grass. I don't know. We'll come up with some steps that work for you. So we develop coping strategies so that when you notice you start to slip back into those perfectionist tendencies, you can calm yourself down. And when you do that, you start to feel more confident. And you really work on building your confidence. What if you're okay? Let's prove to your brain that you're okay. Let's do this afraid. And we develop a lot of self-compassion in this too, just knowing that it's okay if you're not perfect. No one out here is. We are all unique. And unique is exactly what we need to be. And I just want you to think, what would it be like if everybody in the world was perfect? And remember, when you think about this, you are thinking about your own perfect, because my perfect and your perfect aren't necessarily the same things. What would it be like if everybody was perfect? How would we ever make progress? I want you to mess up. I want you to know that your way of being and thinking is actually already perfect. And it's perfect because it's not like anybody else's. And that doesn't mean it's flawless. And it doesn't mean you never mess up. It just means that your way of doing it is exactly the right way. Okay. Coaching is not about fixing you. It's not about there being anything wrong. It's about helping you see yourself and to be able to move forward. I can help you do that. There are 2 ways you can talk to me about how I can help you. One is to click the link in my Instagram bio and schedule a coaching consultation. It's super easy. You just pull up your calendar, you take a look at mine, you pick a time, and you give me a call on the phone. The second way is just to either comment or message me. You can say, hey, message me, and I'll message you. Or you can send me a message and say, how do I talk to you? And I'll say, okay, let's schedule a time to talk. We jump on the phone, we talk about all the things, and then you get to decide what you want to do next. But any way it goes, that consultation call is going to be super powerful and super important to helping you see where these perfectionist tendencies kind of slip in, what anxiety is like for you, and how you can actually get past those things. Okay, you guys, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for tagging other people who might have some of these tendencies in the most loving way possible, because we're not pointing fingers at people. Go back, listen to this again. Pay attention to the things that are sticking out for you, and then schedule your call. I'm really looking forward to talking with you. If it's not next Friday on an Instagram Live, it'll be on a phone call, on a consultation call, right? Okay, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon.